It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command Podcast Playoff Edition. Let's go, Logan. We have a playoff game to preview. Commanders, Bucs. It's Sunday night. It is in Tampa. In the shadows of that giant pirate ship. It is where the Commanders started their season, and they are headed back for their first playoff game of the Jayden Daniels, Dan Quinn, Adam Peters, Josh Harris era. And Logan, it is going to be one heck of a matchup. Tampa is a very, very potent team. We'll get to what Jayden Daniels and company can do to match that in just a little bit, but we're actually going to start with the Commanders defense against this Tampa offense, an offense led by Baker Mayfield, best season of his career, one of the best quarterback seasons we've seen in a while. That's not going to be up for like MVP discussion. I mean, Baker threw for 4,500 yards, 41 touchdowns, and he's not going to finish top 5 in MVP voting. That's just kind of the craziness of the quarterback position this year. But a prolific season. Bucky Irving was also fantastic, the running back, the rookie coming in from Oregon. And Liam Cohen, the guy who's orchestrating it, is probably going to get a head coaching job very, very soon if he wants one, Logan. So when you watch this team, you watch Tampa's offense, and we think back to what we saw week 1. We think of what it is now. What has Liam Cohen done that's gotten him so much praise and so much success this season?
Yeah, I'm glad we're starting with Liam Cohen because I do think that he does some really good stuff offensively. So I think just if you look like kind of super high level, I think you look at a well-engineered run game on first and second down. And what I mean by that is like he tends to find personnel and formation that give the offensive line and the blocking surface some type of numerical advantage. And then you stack on top of that some type of motion or shift that kind of just challenges the run fits of the defense, right? Like the one that comes to mind from the first game is we're going to be in like a kind of a tight formation. We're going to motion that slot receiver out with like kind of a jet on a fast motion. And then the nickel player, who's sometimes Jeremy Chin, who's sometimes Noah, like has to run out with that. And then all of a sudden the B gap is wide open. That motion that's kind of given the Commanders a hard time throughout the year was the genesis started with Liam Cohen week 1 versus Tampa Bay, in my opinion. And then you look at like the jet sweeps, the traps, the misdirection from the backfield. It really felt like, honestly, and this is a compliment, it felt like a classic like single wing offense. You know, everyone kind of gives Mike McDaniels this credit for bringing single wing principles to the spread. And, you know, I don't know if that's exactly true, but I think you see a lot of that with Liam Cohen. And what I mean by that is there's misdirection. We're attacking the 3 technique a lot in our run scheme, right? The guy that's to the tight end strength. We're finding ways to trap guys. We're basically giving you a bunch of different backfield sets that all kind of marry together. I think that's the other thing that shows up. Like it wasn't as successful versus New Orleans, but for example, this is like the simplest version is they're running like GT. So guard, tackle, counter, right? So that's where you pull the guard and tackle to the strength of the formation. And so they have GT, but they have a jet sweep in the backfield, right? So they run that one time, the defensive end pitches down, the next time Baker pulls it and throws it to the flat, then they have a jet sweep straight off of the GT pull action. So they have 3 runs off of almost exactly the same kind of pre-snap, post-snap look. And I think that that's really good stuff. Like I think back to, again, I like it because that's how Kyle does it, right? It's like we install a run, we're going to marry a play action to it, we're going to marry a keeper to it, we're going to marry a complementary run off it. Like when I'm at the high school, like that's how I install a play. I say, this is the run I want, this is what I want to do. And then I go those three kind of derivatives off of it. Now, obviously this is the NFL, so they can go, you know, exponentially more because the guys can handle more. But I think like that's something that I really, really like about his first and second down stuff. And then on third down, I think they just do a really good job of not always, but most of the time finding good and creative ways to get their playmakers in good spots to be successful. You know, like Mike Evans, it was Chris Godwin earlier in the season. Bucky Irving, not so much. He's more of a first and second down guy, but I think that's good stuff. And so that's good offensive principle. And then I think on third down, you're getting a big elevation from Baker Mayfield in terms of extending plays. So I think the offensive structure is excellent. I think you're putting guys in good positions to be successful. And I think all that goes back to Liam Cohen kind of maximizing talent. And I do think it's interesting. You know, Will Levis was, you know, kind of at one point supposed to be a top 15 pick in the NFL. That was when he was with Liam Cohen at Kentucky, right? Like, and so he does have this knack and understanding for and this is something that's really hard to articulate to someone who doesn't watch a lot of football. He has a really good understanding of how to manipulate coverage through route concept, right? Cliff does too, right? The smart ones, the really good ones do. And he's got a really good feel for that. And I think he has a really good feel for coaching the defensive reaction to certain concepts. And I think that's one of the reasons you see Baker kind of operating at such a high efficiency, in addition to Baker's natural playmaking ability.
And all of it has come alive this year. And there's so many different ways to look at everything you just said. Just since you mentioned Baker, one, I think totally the in structure stuff. I've said it a bunch this year. There's no one that throws with more conviction than Baker Mayfield.
Yeah.
That dude I love watching Baker play because that dude drops back. It's like, this ball's supposed to go here. Coach Cohen said I can throw it, and he will step into that ball and just drive it. Now, if you can trick him, he'll throw it right to you. And he's had some, 4 touchdown, 2 pick kind of games this year, and you have to take advantage of those opportunities. But I think the thing that's been magical about Baker's season is the play extending. And it started week 1 against Washington. They could not bring him down, even though he was under pressure quite a bit. And in fact, according to Next Gen Stats, Mayfield has completed 34 of his 47 passes outside of the pocket for 406 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a pick this season. That's the highest completion percentage on such passes in a season in the Next Gen Stats era. So that's 72% outside the pocket. Now, he's only outside the pocket 10.3% of his attempts. That's 4th lowest in the NFL. But you got to make sure that when he gets outside the pocket, you plaster. And I think the competitiveness of a guy like Evans, the slipperiness of guys like Rashad White and Bucky Irving as receivers. Cade Otton has been terrific this year from the tight end spot. So it is, can you keep him in the pocket? If he gets out, you got to make sure that you plaster, because as good as the offensive structure is, the reason they've gone from like good to great is that extra stuff where the players make it come alive. And I think you see that in the run game too. If we want to keep touching on Baker, we can. But man, what Bucky Irving is doing in the run game is also fantastic. They have, when you create good matchups, it's easier when it's Mike Evans, a future Hall of Famer. So they've just done a really good job of, here's a great structure. It's kind of what I've always, some people are like, oh, when you've got great players, just simplify it down. I'm like, well, what if you put great players in great structure? And that's kind of what they've done. I don't know great outside of like Evans, we're talking about historically, but certainly very good players in an excellent structure, and you're getting one of the most prolific offenses in the league.
Yeah, I definitely think he's maximizing. And just to double click on the Baker thing, and we'll talk about Bucky Irving here in a second, but I do think that one of the things about Baker, it's you were kind of alluding to an extension outside the pocket, but I also think there's an extension in the pocket, which you've seen too. And so basically what I would kind of clump those under is just second reaction throws. And in New Orleans, he had a bunch of them. In our first game, he had a bunch of them. In the Atlanta game, he had a bunch of them. Pretty much every week, to your point, he has a bunch of these where there's a pressure. He kind of ducks a tackle. He kind of steps up in the pocket. He's either scrambling for a first down, or he's made excellent decisions in that regard. He's made, decisions is the wrong word. He's made plays as a thrower and as a runner on 3rd and long situations to keep them on the field. And everyone talks about this is like kind of a national NFL story, but the Brock Purdy effect on Kyle Shanahan's offense, right? Kyle Shanahan was great at, with the pen about getting guys open and dictating throws and manipulating coverage and all that stuff. But when Brock Purdy got there, he elevated, because when it wasn't there, he was able to scramble, extend plays, get that second reaction throw. And I think that's what you're seeing and kind of what you're saying from Baker there. And it's the thing that breaks defenses. It breaks defenses, quite frankly, because you're really playing for that 2.3 second kind of throw. And Baker's average time to throw is 2.7. So obviously there are some of those kind of on schedule, on time throws in there. But to add those tenths of seconds, that means you're extending and you're getting out of stuff. And I saw a statistic, I forget exactly where it was, and I'm going to butcher it, but on 3rd down, his time to throw is 3.13, which is NFL leading in terms of time to throw, which again, I think captures this metric we're trying to talk about here. So to me, if you're the Commanders, you got to say, hey, we have to rush with tremendous discipline. We have to have a great rush blitz plan to get pressure on him, because again, no team is good enough to handle a 3-second drop back. It's just too long, right? Guys find ways to get open. And if Baker is doing a good job finding them, that's going to be devastating. So can you manage that kind of loose, his playmaking from the pocket? I think is a huge storyline in this game. And it's something that when you talk about, I give Bram notes, that's like my first note. Like on third down, can you keep him in the pocket? And then can we hold up from a coverage structure standpoint in the back end? It's going to be a big point for me because in addition to his playmaking ability, the offensive line is a playmaking unit in its own right with Tristan Wirfs and guys like that playing really good football. So it becomes like one of those things where you're like, damn, this is going to be really hard to deal with defensively.
And they're really good at staying on schedule. And we'll get to the running game in a second, but another element of the pass game is the screen game. It's arguably the best screen game in the entire league. And Baker actually leads the NFL in yardage on throws behind the line of scrimmage. And they'll throw them to receivers. They'll throw them to tight ends. They'll throw them, obviously, to the running backs who are very, very good space players. But it kind of, when we talk about the Baker's average time to throw and that number being fairly low, it's balanced by these longer plays that he extends with 1 second throws because he's getting the ball out on a screen. And in week 1, it was actually Baker's third quickest of the season. He was 2.36 seconds in week 1 against the Commanders, including a couple of touchdowns. Now, those were fade routes to Mike Evans, so, take that for what it's worth in terms of the time to throw. Quick throws, touchdowns. It's not like he's getting out quick slants and guys running 70 yards. You only have to drop back so far when you're on the 1 yard line and you just loft the ball up to a 6'4", Mike Evans. But the screen game element is really huge because I think Joe has pressured quite a bit. He was asked a couple of weeks ago, he's like, oh, can you generate more pressure? He's like, I don't think I can. Like we just got to land with what we got because I don't think I can blitz much more than I have this season. And there's one play that I wrote down in my notes from from week 1. That's like screen into blitz. And if you get caught in the wrong look, the wrong blitz against a screen, like that becomes an explosive play. And so whether it's just simply, hey, this is a pretty mundane screen that gets 6 yards, but now it's 2nd and 4, or a big explosive play, they've got to be really on their P's and Q's on this screen game, both running back, wide receiver, and even a guy like Cade Otton, occasionally they'll throw one too. And that's an enormous part of their success because then they're just not in a ton of those 3rd and longs, even though, as you said, Baker will make some plays if they get there.
And it's their 1st and 2nd down efficiency is good. Obviously, in the New Orleans game wasn't great. That's the most recent game they played. I think New Orleans had a really good plan for them. And obviously, we saw how good New Orleans is on 1st and 2nd down at stopping the run and kind of managing some of these elements of the Tampa Bay offense. And you mentioned the screen game, and I really thought like New Orleans did just a tremendous job of being like, we know this is something you want to do. Like we're going to have a really good plan for it, and we're going to be aggressive to stop it. And I think that's kind of the mindset you got to bring into this game. It's like you got to be super physical on 1st and 2nd down. You got to and you can't be. And I think this is kind of I don't know if we talked about this on this show because I've done a lot of these shows, but one of the things that sticks out to me is like Joe Witt Jr. wants to kind of play, light boxes. I think we've talked about this a bunch, right?
Yeah,
he wants
we
to
talked
play
about
light
it
boxes on 1st and 2nd down. And the thing is, when you look at New Orleans playing light boxes, their front four is good enough to kind of physically mash it and kind of make it tough to run the football. They can kind of allocate more resources. They can play different coverage structures to help stop screens and things like that. Can this front four and the 2 linebackers do the same thing would be my question. Can you play in a physical manner on 1st and 2nd down that allows you to play coverage structures to take away play action shots, to take away screens, to kind of have that level of focus where you can kind of say our 6 guys are taking care of the run and the rest of you guys can handle the screen, handle the play action, handle these like other elements to the RPO. And so I think that's where I get a little bit nervous because over the course of the season, while I do think the defense has been good at what Joe Witt's wanted them to do, they've had a hard time with that main piece, which is stopping the run. So, like, again, you look at what other teams have done well, and I'm thinking about New Orleans right now. Really physical in the front four. Linebackers, Demario Davis did an excellent job sniffing out screens, running the football, was really just tremendous in that game. And, can you get a similar level of performance from this defense? I think is like the $1 million question. So to me, 3rd down, containing Baker Mayfield. 1st down, it's stopping the run. Really is what it comes down to. And we're going to talk about Bucky Irving here because you got some stats about him, but that to me is the story. Screens, runs. He's the straw that stirs the drink to me on 1st and 2nd down. He's been impressive this year.
So here's your Bucky Irving stat of the day. Bucky Irving forced a missed tackle on 35.8% of his touches this season, the highest rate in the NFL for a minimum of 100 touches. Irving gained an additional 609 yards after forcing missed tackles.
Wow.
That's second most in the league behind Derrick Henry. Irving's missed tackle rate was 13.2% higher than backfield mate Rachaad White during the regular season. The Commanders now, here's the good news. They have missed a tackle on just 11.6% of tackle opportunities this season. That's the fifth best rate in the NFL, while allowing 774 yards after missed tackles. That's the seventh fewest in the NFL. So we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Last time the Commanders run Sunday Night Football, in fact, is Bijan Robinson, for volume's sake, had the most forced missed tackles in the league. By rate, it's Irving. And then, they did a decent enough job. There was certainly some missed tackles, but I think the other big one is the yardage, right? Like, what happens if you miss a tackle? Is it then a house call, or is it a 30-yard gain? Or are you rallying to the football? And so you miss one, it's enough to slow the guy down, and someone else comes out in and finishes the job, or someone's else comes in and finishes the job. And I think that's going to be a key thing is, can you rally? Because in watching a little bit of tape on their running game, if the play plays out remotely close to what it does when you drew it up as a coach, this dude's nasty. But if you can muddy it up, and you see some teams that did a really good job in spurts or, for entire games that were able to muddy the front and just make it to where that, when Vince Lombardi drew it up and he's a seal here and a seal there and an alley, if that alley doesn't exist, then you're okay. And that's against any running back, but especially a guy as slippery and I think as explosive, a guy who can go for 50 like Bucky Irving. He's a young running back, doesn't have the hits on his legs. We see this all the time with younger running backs. They still have that like top end vertical speed, and they're in the league for 3 years and they don't run for 50 yards anymore. Bucky Irving's a rookie. He's got that to him. And so if you can muddy up the front, and that means John Allen and Daron Payne and Jerzon Newton, like y'all are going to have to do some dirty work. Then rally and tackle, you can be okay against this run game. But if you give him that crease, if you give him that alley, and maybe it's the one that's designed, maybe it's a cutback. There's a run against the Chargers where it's a trap, and he sees Derwin James come inside and go to Phil, and he just run because they've got the edge sealed, and dude, he just gets out for 18 yards. And you're like, dang, that is insane vision. But if you can make it muddy, you can survive against this run game. If not, he's going to slip a tackle and you're toast.
No, I think that's 100% right. I think he he does a really. It's interesting to watch him because I don't think on first and second, like he's not like Bijan where it's like 5 yards, 6 yards, 7 yards. He's the rush down to down efficiency is not there because he's not a big guy. So when it's a little bit muddy, he can't like cram it.
There's no space for him to slip tackles and do the things that he does.
Yeah, so I think, again, I'll go back to the New Orleans game because I think they were winning the first half. They looked dominant. New Orleans did in that game. So I think it's a really good marker of like what, and they kind of play similar structures on first down to what the Commanders do. Is the thing that sticks out to me about that is like he went for like 1, he's going for 2, he's got 3, he's got a -1, and then he pops one off for 40, and it's just like that is a back-breaking play because then what does Tampa Bay go down and do? They go down and score, and it's just his ability to, it was like just a duo, kind of like this, the modern duo now where they're kind of flash mosing the tight end, he's kicking out the defensive end, and they're wrapping for the linebacker. And Bucky Irving, there's a small crease, kind of works his way through, runs up on the linebacker, makes him miss, make the safety miss, and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to score. And thank God the safety slowed him down enough where they're able to tackle him. But I just think about comparing that to the first game where I thought Liam Cohen we go back and kind of bring it full circle here, did an excellent job on first and second down with traps and whams and taking advantage of the Commanders' penetrating 3 technique, like really took advantage of them. And obviously Rachaad White was the starting running back at the time, but getting Bucky Irving into those same looks is a catastrophic proposal in my opinion, because you talk about a seal and an alley, like that was something that I would say pretty much every time they ran trap, there was a cavernous hole that was really hard to fill, and thank God the guys were able to make tackles. But I think to your point, because of his missed tackle rate, because of his explosiveness, and really he's not like top end fast. his acceleration is nuts. Like, I think he ran a 4.6 at the combine. Like, he didn't run fast, but he plays like an absolute demon in terms of speed. Like, that could be those creases that we had in the first game. And again, the defense is a totally different animal now. I think they're much better coached. I think they understand kind of schematically what they need to do at a higher level.
It was also probably the worst missed tackle game of the season. Like, it was kind of that week one, like, we haven't really tackled yet. And you got dudes like Bobby Wagner and Jeremy Chin who don't really miss tackles, missing tackles all over the place.
Yeah, I'd agree, but I think that's something where I'd be like, hey, we got to get our rules locked in on how we're going to play these runs, because if I'm Liam Cohen, I might not run those all the same, but I'm saying, man, these were so good, and these runs have been so good versus Washington this entire year. Philly had a couple gashes, Baltimore had a couple like this, where it's like, let's give it a shot and let's see if they've got it cleaned up, and if they don't, then we're going to run it. If not, we've got other stuff we can get to. But that's something, especially with Bucky Irving. He's going to get those touches now, and you cannot win this game if he's got 3 or 4 explosives. Like, you just can't. And I think that's something you got to just be hyper aware of.
Yeah, and to your point, or looking at the numbers behind that, explosiveness, you can kind of measure an EPA per play. Like, do you get these big chunks? Do you score? Do you get first downs? He is 4th in running back EPA per rush. So it's the guys that you would expect that are ahead of him. But the only guys that are ahead of him in EPA per attempt are Jahmyr Gibbs. He's 3rd. Jahmyr Gibbs, Derrick Henry, Bucky Irving.
Yeah.
He's tied with Saquon in EPA per rush. But he's 12th in success rate.
It doesn't surprise me.
Talk about down in, down out efficiency. He's much more average.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise. I think those statistics illuminate him perfectly, right? That's exactly who he is as a player, right? He's really explosive. He gets you first downs. He gets you chunk plays. And again, the down to down isn't there the way it is for Derrick Henry or Bijan Robinson. He really. It's funny that he's the 3rd guy with Saquon, because he reminds me a lot of Saquon. Like, in terms of, I'm not a great dirty runner, right? But when there's a crease, I'm going to take it for 50, and you're going to be like, damn, like, that happened real quick. So I think Washington has shown at times this year that they can batten down the hatches and stop the run, specifically in the second half of that. In the first half of the New Orleans game, the second half of the Philly game, they can do it. But I think that's got to be, to me, a really huge point of emphasis, because if you watch the first and second down cut up, they are pretty dogmatic about running on first down. Like, I'd say it's probably about 70. It feels like it's 70% of the time. And I don't know, I didn't look up a stat for it, but when I'm watching, like, this is a run, here's a run, here's a run. And then they kind of are relying on them being in 2nd and 7, 2nd and 6, or getting an explosive carry to kind of maximize the offense. So I do think that's a huge part of it. And if you can get them in a 2nd and 8, 2nd and 9, the way that New Orleans did, I think you got a real shot at kind of throwing a monkey wrench in their offense, because I'll tell you, even for as good as Baker's been on 3rd and long this year, like, you can't live that way, and Baker's going to throw incompletions. You're going to take a sack, like, he's going to throw interceptions. And I think, like, to me, it's funny talking through every single week. You're like, sometimes you want, hey, let's put the ball in Baker's hands, I think being more aggressive on first down this week is probably in the cards. A little bit more straight cover 3, asking to leverage those outside corners a little bit more. And if Marshawn Lattimore's healthy, that becomes a little bit easier. But I think that's something you really got to think about. Just being a little bit more kind of breaking type a little bit and saying, hey, we got to stop this run game on first and second down.
And now for our featured presentation. Speaking of Marshawn Lattimore, that's a lot of what folks want to talk about is the Evans-Lattimore matchup. And why wouldn't you? Because they've fought a bunch. They've punched each other in the helmet. Why do football players punch each other in the helmet? Doesn't that hurt, Logan?
You kind of just lose your mind, honestly. You just lose your mind. Like, there's no, like, as I've done it, I've punched someone in the helmet, and you're just like, that was dumb. Like, my hand hurts real bad now, right? Yeah. But you're just so mad at this person for doing something ridiculous.
Because you're playing a violent physical sport where testosterone is overflowing and you lose control of your emotions, because that is, of course, what happens, because that's the way human beings work. Yeah.
And you're like, my hand hurt. I remember one time Niles Paul got in a fight in practice and really just popped off on somebody. It was like, it sounded like it was like bing, 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 because he boxed a little bit in his spare time. And so, but the guy on the other side is totally fine because he's got a helmet on. And then Niles comes up to me. He's like, I think I just broke my hand. I'm like, come on, man. Like, you can't be breaking your hand in a practice on like a Tuesday because
you punched a dude in the helmet.
In the helmet. Anyway, we digress.
So Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore have punched each other in the helmet. I feel like there was a time where maybe someone swung a helmet at each other. I don't know. There's
Dude,
been a
they've
lot
been
of,
getting after it, man.
Yeah.
For years, they've been getting after it.
Whatever. I haven't going back and watched any of it this week. The highlights of the fights or the lowlights, depending on your perspective. I'm sure that NBC will show it Sunday night, a couple of fisticuffs. But here's the thing. Through all of that hullabaloo, there is real football behind this rivalry as well.
Yeah.
There's a reason that Mike Evans has been very frustrated with Marshawn Lattimore, and that is that twice a year for many years, Marshawn Lattimore covered Mike Evans as well as anyone has ever covered Mike Evans. So Marshawn Lattimore is aligned across from Mike Evans on at least 50% of his routes in 12 of 13 career games, including the playoffs, with only one game under 50%. And ironically enough, Logan Paulson, that game was when they matched up earlier this season before Lattimore got traded. So they've already played once this year.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, in the week, whatever that was, the early week matchup. I think it was like week 3 or something like that, between New Orleans and Tampa. And for whatever reason, Dennis Allen, at the time the head coach and defensive coordinator, de facto defensive coordinator for the Saints, did not have Lattimore follow Evans around. But every other game that they've ever played, like it's been star coverage, it's been, shadowing the whole deal. Overall, Lattimore has aligned across from Evans on 271 of 398 routes across those games. That's 68.1%. Lattimore has challenged Evans at the line of scrimmage consistently across those matchups, aligning in press coverage 67% of the time. Evans has caught 16 of his 31 targets, with Lattimore as the nearest defender, for 305 yards and 3 touchdowns, with an average target separation of 1.7 yards. But nearly half of those yards came in their 2 matchups in 2018. Evans has been held without a reception against Lattimore in 5 of their 13 career matchups. So, Marshawn Lattimore looks like he's going to play. He's full participant in practice on Wednesday. We record on Thursday morning. So unless there's a setback, Marshawn Lattimore's good to go. You have to imagine after he followed A.J. Brown around that that's going to be the plan here. How does that change what we saw week 1, where Mike Evans had a pretty substantial day with 2 touchdowns against Benjamin St-Juste, who played him very tightly, but is just doesn't have the ball skills and the play strength and the competitive catch point ability that Marshawn Lattimore has, which is how Mike Evans, those characteristics are the things that are going to send Mike Evans to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, no, I agree. I actually think, like you said, I think Benjamin St-Juste had a pretty solid game. I think 2 things. One, we didn't talk about this in the preview. I think the defensive secondary in general is so much better than they were week 1. I think, and it's not even just like, they're physically better. No, it's just like they understand the defensive concepts better. They're communicating better. They're on the same page more. There's not these free runners and explosive plays, and they understand kind of checks and bunches and all this stuff at a much higher level. So I think that's a huge element. I also think when you look at the second Philly game and Marshawn and how they matched up with A.J. Brown and how Joe Wood Jr. called the game, he just was way more aggressive. And by aggressive, I mean they just played way more man coverage. And I do think that this is a talented group for Tampa Bay, but they're not overly scary. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like they're good, but they're not great. And I think Mike Evans right now at this point in his career, Hall of Fame career, like you said, I'm going to give him his credit, and he deserves his credit. He's one of my favorite players I've ever watched. I used to go watch his tape in season when I was playing because I just really enjoyed watching him. He's not the same guy that he was earlier in his career, right? He's a bigger body guy, hyper competitive, and he's still good, but they don't have the teeth without Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin was the guy that kept them on schedule, made them efficient. McMillan right now is kind of stepping into that role.
He's doing a really good job, but he's not Chris Godwin. He's not
Chris Godwin. So Ott's a good player, but I think in terms of coverage in a man-to-man situation, if Lattimore's playing, Marshawn Lattimore's playing, all of a sudden everything kind of gets real even. And you're like, okay, I think Mike Sainristil can cover the slot receiver. I think Jeremy Chin matches up okay with Ott. And all of a sudden you're like, we're in a good spot here. So I do think that his addition is going to be huge. And I just thinking about those numbers you're talking about and just watching Mike Evans over the course of his career, like Marshawn's play strength is tremendous. And I think that's going to be a huge advantage here because what Mike Evans does is he is bigger than you, he's stronger than you, he's better than you at the catch point. And with Marshawn, it's not that it negates that advantage.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why you see him become so less effective in the games where he's playing Marshawn. So if he does play, I do think it allows Joe Witt Jr. on first and second down to do some of the stuff we're talking about. We can play another guy in the box. We can be more aggressive. We can maybe bring a run pressure. We can be more aggressive with our blitzing on third down. Like that all kind of comes out of that. And I think, and he was like, what am I supposed to do when Marshawn's back? Is it really going to affect me that much? When you look at the Philly game, it's like, yeah, you were way more aggressive in terms of coverage structure, right? Usually like to throw in some cover 2, some cover 3, more zone. And all of a sudden it's like, the big dog's here. Let's let them hunt. So I think that's something that I'm excited for, because I do think it just changes even Joe Witt Jr.'s mindset a little bit. And just that shift in mindset, I think is going to be really, really helpful in a lot of the kind of pain points and struggle points that the Tampa Bay offense presents.
For sure. And I think it's also worth mentioning, in week 1, not only was it fresh, was it new, it's Joe's first game as a coordinator. It's these guys' first time playing together. The guys playing are different. Like Emmanuel Forbes was starting corner in that game. Jamin Davis played double-digit snaps as a rotational defensive end in that game. So you talk about stopping the run. Like you've upgraded from Jamin Davis to Jalen Holmes and some of the other guys that have done a good job for this team. As the like rotational
Jean Baptiste.
Pieces.
About like Daron Payne at end. Like all those guys, you just feel much more comfortable and confident about those guys in those roles as opposed to Jamin, who. He was making a transition. They tried it, and he wasn't there to stop the run. Put it that way. Right. Yes.
Fedarian Mathis played double-digit snaps in that game. So you have very, very different dudes in some key spots, including one of your starting corners that has gone from Emmanuel Forbes to Marshawn Lattimore. Nevertheless, the experience of an entire regular season, not only for the players, but for Joe in his first season as a coordinator. And I think we've seen him get better and better at calling this stuff over the course of the season. So it's going to be really exciting to watch that battle. So I would expect Tampa to certainly get some wins, but can Washington do enough to hold it down to allow Jayden and the offense to put up the points they need to and get a playoff win for the first time since 2005? Take command, Logan Paulson there, Craig Hoffman here. And Jayden Daniels in week 1 against the Tampa Bay Bucs was making his first career start. He ran around in some ways like a chicken with his head cut off, trying to find plays, and he had a nice little day on the ground, but it was certainly not enough to get the win. And I think now we look back at that game, Logan, and go, wow, that was really uncharacteristic of Jayden Daniels. Obviously, he's still arguably the best scrambler in football, had the best scrambling statistics of any quarterback in football, but he's so much more calm and collected in the pocket. He sees the field so much better than week 1. When you look back at that week 1 performance against Tampa and think about what you'd be telling Jayden if you are Cliff, if you're Tavita Pritchard, if you're on that staff, you're Brian Johnson this week, like you just kind of chuckle at how far he's come in this rookie season?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one thing when I was watching the first game, I'm like, this really is not – it's not transferable. It's not like Cliff's offense, and that's nobody's fault. It's Jayden Daniels' first game, and I think he had like a fine game. But like we talked about when we reviewed the Tampa Bay game, there's throws that he makes with such confidence now, right, and such dexterity now that he just didn't attempt. He was just like, I don't love it. I'm going to scramble. And I get that. I understand in your first game being, and I think this is also to Jayden's credit. Like one of the things that's made you awesome this year is how you protect the football. And he was very protective of the football that game. But I do think you see, like, I had to do a breakdown for Command Center about the difference between that game and this game. And one of the things is like, you go through Jayden's season this year and you're watching all the throws and you're like, he's made throws that he's turned down 20 times this year. Like there's a 5-yard out, which he turns down because he doesn't like the DB position. If you watch the Philly game, he makes like 3 of those. And then you watch New Orleans, he makes 2 of them. And you're like, that's 5 yards on an easy completion to Terry, and we're doing all right, And so again, like I think he elevated big time in terms of how he scrambled, but I also think he's just matured so much as a passer. And it's not like he's throwing the ball better. He just understands NFL windows better. And like that was something that we talked about week 1. It's like, is he going to do this? And he's emphatically done it. And I think when you watch him versus like the New Orleans game, when you watch the Philly game, like he just has so many different ways to beat you now. Like he can run, obviously, but as a passer, the different types of throws, the different arm angles, the different layerings and touches we've seen it all this year. And so obviously he's had days where he's been off, but if he's on and if he's ready to go, like, he's become like a problem a little bit, to deal with, obviously, like, because of the decision making about when to run, when to throw, when to be aggressive, and just his natural playmaking kind of intuition is something that shows up big time. And it's something that's developed. And I kind of cite the Cincinnati game as kind of the genesis of that, but you see that just continue to develop over the course of the year. So when you look at him specifically, you're kind of like, this is the most bare bones, rudimentary version of you as a rookie quarterback in the NFL. And to his credit, each and every week, and we've talked about this each and every week, has just grown. And so the player now and the player then are completely different to my eye. And I really am excited to see what this looks like, because I do think Tampa Bay is going to do some interesting stuff to him, but I think he's more ready for it now.
For sure. And he's gone from a guy that's like, oh, this is at the very least going to be fun watching him run around this year, and we'll see where it goes long term, to a guy that's probably going to finish top 5 in MVP voting. He's 4th in the NFL in EPA. Like, he's a legit, I kind of chuckle when you were like, he's kind of become a problem. I was like, yeah, I think he's more than kind of become a problem. Right. Like, he's become a legitimate top 10 quarterback in the NFL as a rookie. And now, we'll see long term if that holds. CJ Stroud, obviously last year, we can flash that up as the warning sign that just because you did it as a rookie doesn't mean that it means you've made it forever. But I think we also trust Jayden to do the work to probably make it stick. Right. But that's a different discussion for a different time.
This week specifically, on that point, like, we trust Jayden, we trust Adam, we trust the staff, in a way that is really unique. 100%. But yeah, go ahead. I had to get that.
Yeah, no, 100%. We trust the infrastructure as well as the player, which is exactly what you want. That's why he was the guy selected where he was, and it's why he's been able to grow as much as he has. I mean, Stroud came in as, I think, a more developed passer than we realized coming out of Ohio State, and he just rode that, and he certainly got better, but he came in on fire. Watching Jayden evolve has been terrifically fun, and I think one of the things that he has learned is, again, that NFL Open, and that also, there's NFL Open and there's Terry McLaurin Open. Terry is the best contested catcher in the league statistically in terms of yardage, touchdowns, the whole deal. He does more when he is not open than anyone else in football. From that week 3 really on against Cincinnati all the way through last week, where we were just talking before we got started here about some of the plays he made in the final drive for Marcus last week. Just unbelievable contested catches in tight windows, taking hits, coming in fearless. And really, weeks 1 and 2, it felt like Cliff, and to an extent Jayden, but I think even more so Cliff, didn't quite realize what he had in Terry. And by week 3, it was kind of like, hey man, let's get 17 the ball. And he explodes against Cincinnati. Biggest play, Jayden's first signature play, that touchdown down the right side to seal it. And from there, Terry's on to another 1,000-yard season, and ultimately the team TD record that he seals last week against the Cowboys. And I think getting Terry way more involved is one of the ways this game is going to look the most different compared to week 1, where he had 2 catches for 17 yards. Now, Jamel Dean's a good corner. He hasn't been playing in a couple weeks. He should be back this week. He actually covered Terry on 18 of his 23 routes in week 1. He was only targeted once in those routes. But I think Jamel Dean, if you're on Terry for 78% of the time in this game, prepare for a lot more action, sir.
Yeah, I would think so. And I think you just look at think about that relationship and how it's developed. Like, I think back to, the second Philly game where he's getting the explosive play over the top, the Pittsburgh game, explosive play over the top, the Cleveland game, explosive play over the top. Like, I mean, dude's a maniac this year. That relationship and what it's done for the offense has just been so prolific, and their ability to kind of make these big moments, like Terry on a slant on 3rd and short. And I think, to your point, Cliff's understanding that is a big time player in this offense. Let's start moving around, and then you see his production continue to develop. And I forget which game it was, but he had 8 catches for 80 yards, and it wasn't this big explosive play, but he's able to kind of just first down here, hitch here, contested catch there. And he can do it both ways, which I think is great. And so I do think that relationship, I think the emergence of guys like OZ, the guys like Jamison Crowder, kind of to supplement Terry, are also big. And again, like we've talked about, they have their strengths and Terry has his strengths. But I think the other thing, we talked about trusting Adam and Dan and Jayden. Like I trust Cliff because he just understands like versus certain coverage, versus certain matchups, like this is where we want to work with the football. And I don't know if that's Tavita, Cliff, probably a combination of everybody working together to be like, hey, like look at like this is what the coverage is supposed to do. This is the matchup we like this is who we're going to put there. Let's make it go. And I just think you just see not only a maturation from Jayden, but a maturation just from the offense in terms of finding what guys do well and helping maximize them. So I think this is going to be, again, the Terry thing is huge because I think like look at we talk about this all the time. Like the number one of the many drivers of offensive success is explosive plays, and Terry's been an explosive play machine for this offense kind of down the stretch. So I think that's going to be a huge deal. I think again, Jayden's development, the emergence of some of these playmakers. Zach Ertz, I felt like there was a couple times in the first game where Zach was open. There was opportunities for him on routes, and Jayden's turning that down. So I just think there's so much more here for the offense based on that first matchup. Like you're just like, man, if you just hit the stuff that's there as opposed to run around. And again, the scrambles were super efficient and super effective, but like it's going to be so much more dynamic. And I'm kind of curious to see what Tampa Bay does to counter the new Commanders, if you will. Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to play this? And I think that's going to be a really compelling story.
Well, the Buccaneers are on some level a different team as well, although the week 1 version of them has resembled the weeks 11 through 18 version of them more than almost any other game in their first pre-bye stint. So after their bye in week 11, the Buccaneers became the blitz happiest team in the NFL, blitzing on 48%. Yeah, 48, almost 1 out of every 2 pass attempts, which is just a crazy number. That said, they blitzed Jayden 47% in week 1. So that's kind of how they played in week 1. I'm sure that you'd have to go into detail, and this would be the time if they're doing it the same way that they, the blitz packages that they deployed in week 1. Is that what they're doing now? And by the way, it's not just that they're doing it, and it's kind of, I think of like Wink Martindale, where it's like, yeah, he was blitzing all the time with the Giants, but it wasn't really working that much. You'd have weeks where it was, you have 8 sacks, but a lot of times you're just giving up 400 yards because your guys are exposed on the back end all the time. No. The Bucs, they lead the league in unblocked pressures. They are converting them into sacks at a pretty high rate. Like they are doing the damn thing when it comes to their pressure package. So, led by Yaya Diaby, what are you seeing from this Buccaneers pressure package that is similar to what we saw against Washington in week 1? And maybe what are some other things that Joe and Bobby Johnson and the offensive line crew are going to have to deal with this week?
Yeah, I think that's the thing to me is just like I went back and watched all their pressures, which is a lot because, like you said, they blitz a lot. And
so you watched half their defensive snaps.
Yeah, you're just like, God. And I think the crazy thing is like obviously they bring like run blitzes on first down, which are problematic. But I think the third down stuff is where you're like, yikes, this is a lot. Like they just have. Like they have, like, for example, I think I maybe talked about this already, but they have like the 6 guys up on the line of scrimmage, kind of in their blitz package. Like the Commanders run something similar. There's 2 guys standing up. There's 4 defensive linemen. Just in that front, I could probably cite 6 to 8 variations of pressure patterns that they brought just out of that one front. So it's not like like there's something like when you're in a blitz meeting, for example, and it's usually on Thursday, like back when I was playing, they'd be like, this is our third down blitz meeting. Let's go through the pressures. See where this guy lines up. See how he's kind of outside this player here. Like they're going to bring this pattern. And you just kind of go through and like, okay, like they're all here. With this, like I kind of went through it and was like, is there a tell? And I know the coaches are going to be locked in. They're going to find a tell. But because there's so much variation off the same look, kind of like the offense with Liam Cohen, how they have kind of the same stuff off the same formation, same personnel. It's the same thing with the defense here. And you're like, what are the tells? So I would just say like Johnson, the offensive line coach, has got to earn his paycheck this week in terms of finding consistent tells to help make sure you get those pressure packages targeted correctly, because it's going to be tough, man. If you're in 3rd and long a lot in this game, it's going to be really, really tough to kind of manage those pressure packages. And the other thing I wanted to point out too is in the first matchup, I felt like Tampa Bay was kind of figuring itself out. like Yaya Diaby, who I think has had a really good year, is like taking inside moves on Wiley all the time and losing contain in the pocket, and Jayden just kind of steps around it, and then there's no contained player and scrambles up the field. So I would think if I'm the defensive coordinator, if I'm Bowles for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I'm like, guys, we're going to bring our pressure. We're going to do what we do. We have to be consistent with our rush lanes. When you look at the teams that have been most effective versus Jayden Daniels, Dallas Cowboys, Philadelphia Eagles in the first matchup, the Pittsburgh Steelers, they were dogmatic about their rush lanes and their rush lane consistency. We will get free runners. We will get free runners like Dallas did because I trust my blitz scheme, but you guys have to keep them in the pocket. If they do both those things, Jayden Daniels they're not going to let him win with his legs. If they can corral him the way we're talking about, because they have guys that rush in a way that's problematic for Jayden. Yaya Diaby's kind of a power rusher. Baldwin, the other guy, the other outside linebacker, Anthony Nelson, excuse me, I'm thinking of a different player. But they compress the pocket as rushers. Vita Vea compresses the pocket as a rusher. And then when you add that compression element to free runners off the blitz, it becomes hard. That's where Jayden Daniels struggles a little bit. So what's the answer from a protection standpoint? What are the answers from a route standpoint? And then Jayden Daniels, can you elevate us the way you've done all year? I think is going to be a big question on third down specifically.
So Diaby this year, 57 pressures, 13 run stuffs. That is just one of 8 edge players to record 50-plus pressures, 10-plus run stuffs. The others,
he's a beast.
Yeah, Myles Garrett, Jared Verse, Jonathan Grenard, Brian Burns, Greg Rousseau, Will Anderson, Max Crosby. So he is in pretty good company in terms of guys that really starred on the edge. Some of them, guys like Garrett and Crosby, obviously longtime standouts, and plenty of others. Will Anderson, one of the best young guys in the league. Rousseau was a monster this year for Buffalo. So really good company that Yaya Diaby is in. So, okay, got it. Write down in the notes, stay out of third and long. Hey, Logan, I have an idea for that. Can we rush the football effectively? This has obviously been a bit of an issue for the Commanders the last couple of weeks in the running back designed run game. It is very hard to run on Tampa. There's a large mountain of a man in the middle named Vita Vea. They literally average 1 yard per carry better, 3.7 versus 4.7 on inside rushes when he's on the field versus not.
That's a crazy statistic.
That is
a crazy
enormous difference. That is like you are elite versus you are one of the worst in the league. Just with the same other 10 guys, and then he's on the field or not. So one, are there packages and things you can use to get him off the field and then run out of sub and whatever else? Two, can you generally just find other ways to rush the football, maybe get outside? Because the one thing I do want to say real quick about the run game is, for as bad as the running back run game has been, the quarterback run game has been excellent. And teams are really trying to make sure that the running back run game is not there. And we can talk about B-Rob, we can talk about the O-line, but like both Jayden and in the second half last week, Marcus were really successful running the football. And so in the playoffs, teams tend to run their quarterbacks more anyway. Yeah. I do wonder if there's just like, fine, if you guys are going to make sure that there's not any room for Brian Robinson to go, does Jayden Daniels wind up with like 10, 12 designed runs in this game, nevertheless, what he gets off of scrambles? So I just think that's worth pointing out is like, for all these bad running games the Commanders have had the last couple of weeks, they're still running for like 150 to 200 yards because Jayden and or Marcus have run wild.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's something that, is there a wrinkle off of that kind of gives you more efficiency from a quarterback run game standpoint? And then what kind of runs do you feel comfortable with Jayden running? So again, that's
at least in this game he should have his helmet sized correctly. If folks forget, week 1 he had his helmet pop off twice. Hasn't been an issue since. So
hasn't been an issue since. We've been really tracking that very thoroughly.
Yes.
So yeah, the Vita Vea thing. It's a fun. Tampa Bay, to me, is fun to watch on first down. First and second down, they're fun to watch. In the same way they're fun to watch on third down, right? They just are they operate in the extremes of defense, which I think is fun, right? They're pressure like crazy on third down. And on first down, they're like, if you are in anything that we deem to be a running formation, we're going to bring out Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey, Logan Hall. We're going to have like our 3-4 base structure. We're going to have Yaya Diaby play like a stand-up linebacker. And then, Anthony Nelson play defensive end on the other side. And it's like we have 5 defensive linemen. We'll have 2 linebackers in there. And we're like, we dare you. We dare you to try to throw the football because we are stopping the run. So to me, like that, it operates in this crazy realm of like teams don't really do that as much anymore, right? Because like everyone saw, oh, let's play gap and a half, let's play more coverage structure, let's get into this Vic Fangio lane. And Todd Bowles is like, nah, we're gonna dare you to throw the ball on first down. And so maybe that's the thing. It's like, you dare us? Well, here we go. We're going to do it. And let's see if you can cover us up and hit an explosive play to Terry and get them out of some of their heavy run stuff. But in that run spacing, they don't play a traditional 3-4. So traditional 3-4 is like you got a 4 technique. So someone that lines up on the inside shoulder of the tackle, a true nose, which sometimes plays a shade. So a true nose means like we're screw to screw, head over each other. And sometimes a shade is like I'm a little shaded to the left or a little shaded to the right. And then there's another 4-eye on the other side. Because Kalijah Kancey is such a good penetrator as a 3 technique, as they basically play 4 down spacing, 3 technique, shade, 5 technique, Sam linebacker, to give him that penetration. For me, if I'm a run game coordinator, I'm like, you know what I want to do? I want to double the shit, excuse my language, out of Kalijah Kancey. Like I want to get after he only weighs 280 pounds. So I'm going to sink those double teams because that's what a 3 technique gives you. It gives you double teams and it gives you good angles. I'm going to double the heck out of him. I'm going to trap the heck out of him. I'm going to wham the heck out of him because he's aggressive up the field. He's going to give you natural creases. And in that look, because Vita Vea is a backside shade, we can pull away, right? So if Biadasz is playing, like that's a matchup that I like. You got to really sink that. But I do think there's opportunities to kind of get after him if they're in their big personnel because of how Kalijah Kancey plays. Now, you're kind of rolling the dice because he is so explosive. I like how you articulated. He's like the Aaron Donald starter kit. Like he's an undersized, hyper explosive, really handsy, like good hands defensive tackle. He's not Aaron Donald.
The fully developed Aaron Donald was also one of the strongest players in the league, and Kalijah Kancey is not that.
Correct. So I would just say, like, can you get after him a little bit? And I think you can. And I think some of the runs to the front side of that are like bounces and things like that are totally viable. But also, why bang your head against the wall? If they're going to do that, they have a coverage player that has to get to the flat that is a 270-pound defensive lineman who is not great in coverage. Like there was a play that really articulates this very nicely in the New Orleans game where they're bringing some type of fire zone, right? And they're dropping Anthony Nelson and Yaya Diaby out into coverage. And they actually match the concept really well, but Rattler just throws it right between the two of them, and it like Keystone Cops, like they almost bump into each other because they're not coverage players, right? They don't do that. They want to be at the line of scrimmage attacking.
They are
so
lost in space.
Yeah, so if they're going to do that, take advantage of it, right? And so that's what I'd say. Like, I know for all you hardcore, like, you know, the Hogs got to run the football. Like, if they're going to play this crazy...
We'll call them Chris Russell acolytes.
Yeah, Chris Russell acolytes. If you're going to play this crazy run structure, like, I'm going to throw the ball. And then when you get out of it, that's when I'm going to run the ball. So, like, that's what I would say to this. Is like, don't bang your head against the wall. Let's take advantage of what they're giving us, which is really good slant windows, really good hitch windows, one-on-one matchups on the outside. Let's let those go. Let Terry eat on first down is what I would say.
Well, yeah, slants and hitches. Welcome to the Terry McLaurin route tree. That, and then let's hit a double move and get a go. Like, Come on. Like that's the thing is, like, take advantage of that. If they have these big, heavy dudes on the field, like, can you get the screen game going? Eckler's back. Diami is running that stuff really well. Like, OZ's running that stuff really well. Terry's a little more hit or miss on it, but I'd be willing to take the big hit to get him a touch, get him some energy, and see if he can do something. So, like, I do think that this staff is going to, you know, try to do that. The thing is, they also know they want to run the football. And I wonder from the identity piece of, like, we want to be more physical. Because I think that's a huge thing this week. One, it's been a huge thing for them the last couple of weeks of, can we get our offensive line to be more physical? And then obviously in the team meeting, like, they're preaching the hell out of that. And especially on the defensive side, like, you want to beat up and smash this Tampa offensive line, who is physical, but, like, can be pushed around a little bit. I heard a couple of people saying that, you know, some previews I was listening to earlier in the week of, like, the physicality of the Washington defense, although they're not the best unit, like they'll hit, and that can be an advantage. So like the physicality piece is going to be preached all week. Does that infiltrate the game plan in a negative way versus being like, yeah, of course we want to hit, but like I'd rather go hit a cornerback out there and get a screen pass and let's get 8 yards versus trying to run straight at Vita Vea and getting 3.7 apparently.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think the other thing too is I look back to the first Giants game, when Dexter Lawrence is in there and they've got these kind of big run stopping personnels, and I thought Cliff did a great job of being like, let's get into some wide splits. Let's push you out. If you're going to be in this heavy stuff, we're going to throw a bunch of screens for 4 and 5 yards a pop. Basically becomes like an analogous run game, and Jayden does such a great job reading that stuff out and getting the ball out of his hands quickly. Because then again, if you're in this structure, the guy that's got to make that tackle is a 270-pound defensive end, like rallying from inside out. And I kind of like that matchup too. So I do think there are, to your point, you don't want you don't want this toughness idea to negatively impact the game plan. And I do think at points this year, you've shown a really good aptitude, if you're Cliff and Johnson, to kind of find different ways to get there. I just say do that. Do what you've done all year. And and again, try to find ways to maximize your guys, because I do think like there is something like this team to me is not built to like just mash you. They're not built that way. You got to be a little creative, and I think you can do that, and I think they should do that. And I think they're still physical. It's just like they're not.
Right, and that's the thing. Is like, can you maybe even get into like some 10? Can you do some like, hey Cliff, you got that air raid bag? I know it's a little dusty. Like, let's get, if they want to be big, like make them pay for being big. Get out there in some 10 stuff, or some lighter personnel, and the even getting in pony personnel with the 2 running backs and 3 wide receivers, or 2 wide receivers and 1 tight end, but the tight end is Ertz, and then spread it out and like. See if they'll go heavy to match that, because technically it's 21. Go heavy, and then just like go run spread, especially if it's Eckler and like McNichols. Like those dudes can run routes like receivers well enough against linebackers, especially 270-pound ones. So outside linebacker types. So like let's party. I think that could be a really interesting thing. By the way, one other random, you talk about like spreading it out. The Commanders' offensive line, last next gen stat of the day, has averaged a width of 6.64 yards in the regular season under Cliff Kingsbury, the 5th widest in the NFL. Is there anything to that, or is that just a random fun fact?
Yeah, this is going to be nerdy football stuff, so get ready.
Look, we're an hour in. If people are still listening, they're here for it. This is the perfect time to get as nerdy as possible.
So like when you go to like coaching clinics for offensive line play, one of the things that's discussed at nauseum is splits, right? So when you watch like spread teams, think like old school air raid, they would have like almost 3-foot splits, which is very, very wide for anywhere, right? It looks like they're almost hash to hash in terms of width. What it does though is it creates natural run lanes, because the defensive line then spaces out accordingly, right? And so it makes it a little bit harder to get in a combination, double teams, things like that, but you get natural space kind of dictated. Then you go to like a triple option or go to Army or Navy. They like to be like 1.5 feet because they want to get into those combinations a little bit quicker. So I do think that, and I think for protections, it's also very helpful because you're widening the edge, right? You're pushing those defensive ends out a little bit farther. So there are pros and cons to both. I'm a big wide split guy. I think that's really important. And that's where if I'm like a GM, I'm always like, I always look for athletic linemen. So, if we're in wide splits, that guy's athletic enough to get in a combination. He's athletic enough to overcome that extra distance he's got to go to get there. But yeah, it shows up, because I think when you look at passing downs, like when you look at really good pockets that they've been able to generate, it's like wide and open. There's nice big throwing lanes for the quarterback. I think that's awesome. But again, sometimes first, second down combinations get a little bit muddy, and it's maybe because they're a little bit wider.
There you go. Stats, information, film breakdown. We got it all. Right down to the offensive line splits here on Take Command. Thanks so much for listening to the preview show. I have no idea exactly what we're going to do post-game, but we are going to do something post-game. This is the part of the week where I realize, I got to figure out post-game, and it happens live as we're recording. It's easy when it's a home game, but this game's on the road, so We'll figure out whether it's me solo, whether I have to convince someone else to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning and do a post-game show. We'll actually probably go pretty much right after the final whistle. So maybe we'll see if there's some quick pressers that we can listen to, but we'll figure that out. But the way to be with us live is to subscribe to the Team 980 on YouTube, 1067 The Fan as well, and then my page at Craig Hoffman. We tri-cast the instant reaction show. Of course, if you're like, win or lose, I'm going to go to bed because I have to go to work on Monday. Then it'll be in your podcast feed for your ride to work in the morning. So we will be live post game. We'll figure out the exact details of that, but look forward to that. And then we will do a film review next week and hopefully another game preview for a matchup against either Philadelphia or Detroit, because that would be fun, because that would mean the Commanders won. Logan will be down there on the broadcast. Make sure you check out everything else he is doing this week. He's been all over the podcast sphere as well as his own shows, including the Command Center show. And of course, I'll be on the radio. We'll have the latest injury reports as well. Typically, the final injury report with game statuses comes out during my show on Fridays, so be tuned in to the Team 980 at 4 o'clock on Friday. Also, we have Melissa Stark from NBC on the show. We have Trevor Sikkema on the show over the next couple of days. So we have some really great interviews previewing this one from all angles on the Hoffman Show. So I'll see you there. Logan will see you all the places he sees you. We're on Instagram as well at Hoffman.sports and Logan_Paulson82. And then we'll reconvene here next week. Thanks so much for watching and listening to Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.